The night my sister accepted an award for a scholarship fund I had paid for, my mother seated me beside the catering station. That was her first move. My sister taking the stage was the second. The lie came third. The River County Civic Hall had been dressed to make generosity look effortless. White linens, gold-trimmed place cards, blue hydrangeas in low glass bowls, a jazz trio by the bar, soft amber lights aimed carefully enough at the stage to make anyone standing there look gentler than they were. The giant screen behind the podium cycled through photographs of scholarship recipients carrying boxes into dorms, holding acceptance letters, grinning beside used cars repaired just in time to get them to campus. The whole room had been designed to say one thing before anyone spoke. Good people are here. Important work happened. Tonight is about gratitude. My sister Vanessa knew how to wear a room like that. She stood under the light in an emerald dress with one hand lightly touching the crystal plaque the MC had just placed in front of her. Her smile was measured, humble in the exact way practiced women can make humility look like beauty. Then the MC said the sentence that turned my blood cold. Tonight we honor Vanessa Carter for her extraordinary leadership and commitment to the Carter Futures Scholarship. The Carter Futures Scholarship. My fund. My donor agreement. My annual transfers. My risk. My work. Vanessa stepped to the microphone and did what she had spent 3 years preparing to do. She made theft sound graceful. I never believed giving back should be about recognition, she said. The room melted. A low sound of approval moved through the tables. My mother reached for her chest as if her heart had been personally touched by the sentence. My father smiled into his folded hands. 2 women from the school board nodded at each other, like they had just witnessed proof that goodness still existed in local life. I sat at table 14, near the service door, close enough to hear silverware shift on empty plates and waiters whisper order numbers as they passed behind me. Not hidden. Worse. Placed. That was my mother's specialty. She never pushed me out violently. She arranged me out of consequence. Vanessa thanked the foundation. She thanked the schools. She thanked the students. Then she tilted her face toward the back of the room and said, "And to my sister Naomi, thank you for always supporting this work in your own quiet way." The room laughed softly. That line was brilliant in the cruelest way. It named me without restoring me. It kept me in the story only as an accessory. Not the donor. Not the founder. Not the woman who built the fund. Just the quiet sister who supported it. That was what my family had always done to me. They did not erase me by denying I existed. They erased me by shrinking the scale of what I did until it fit comfortably beneath someone else's spotlight. If the night had ended there, that would have become the permanent version. The photo. The newspaper caption. The donor archive memory. The county retelling. The polished family myth. But then the side doors opened. A man in a charcoal suit walked in carrying a navy folder. Beside him was the executive director of the River County Education Foundation, Harold Benton, foundation treasurer, keeper of donor records, one of exactly 4 people in the county authorized to know the identity behind the Carter Futures Scholarship. He stepped just far enough into the ballroom to see the stage, the plaque, the printed donor booklet in his hand, and my sister smiling into a microphone built for a lie. Then he looked toward the audience. Toward me, and in a voice calm enough to cut through the applause, he said, "Before this recognition continues, I need Naomi Carter." That was the moment the room changed. Not loudly. Not all at once. But permanently. My mother turned so fast her chair struck the table behind her. Vanessa's hand tightened around the plaque. The MC blinked. The nearest tables went silent first, then the silence spread. For the first time that night, everyone in the room understood 2 things at once. There was paperwork, and the woman beside the catering station mattered more than the woman on the stage. What happened after I stood up is the reason people in River County still remember that gala. But the truth did not begin there. It began years earlier. In a kitchen where one daughter got praised for shining, and the other got praised for being useful. And if you do not understand that part first, you won't understand why I let the room go quiet before I said a single word. The truth being hidden that night was not glamorous. That matters. Because people like my mother and sister survive on the assumption that if something is not glamorous, no one will defend it with enough force to disturb a public celebration. The hidden truth was paperwork. Restricted donor language. Transfer schedules. Foundation compliance notes. Board acknowledgments. Tax letters. 3 annual contributions moved on time, in full, under one donor agreement with one legal name attached to it. Mine. I created the Carter Futures Scholarship 3 years before the gala. Not because I wanted a legacy. Because I read a local article about 4 graduating seniors who had done everything right and were still close to losing their place in college over costs too small for the county to rally around and too large for them to absorb. A loan, a broken transmission, a housing deposit, required textbooks, a laptop replacement, a small balance holding a transcript. The kinds of final barriers that never make elegant fundraising speeches because they are too practical to inspire the right kind of applause. I understood those numbers. I worked in financial systems for a healthcare network. I knew what small gaps can do to a person's future. I also knew what communities like mine ignore most easily. Not catastrophe, but inconvenience. So I called the River County Education Foundation and asked if I could create a restricted fund for last gap continuation barriers. Not tuition, not vanity scholarships, not ceremonial checks for good grades, but direct, targeted support for students who were already almost through the door. The director at the time, Eleanor Price, asked if I wanted to fund it publicly. I said no. She asked if I wanted naming rights. I said no. She asked if I wanted the fund linked to my identity privately for compliance purposes. I said yes. That was my compromise. The only people who knew the donor name were the director, the treasurer, the board chair, and compliance counsel. The money moved. The students benefited. The room never needed to know me. That had been the plan. My mistake was the name. I called it the Carter Futures Scholarship, partly because I wanted it to sound broad enough to belong to the town rather than to one woman. Partly because some foolish, quiet part of me still wanted the family name to sit beside something decent that came from me, even if no one knew it. I should have named it anything else. Because my family has always treated my restraint like open property. The first crack came by accident. A school counselor thanked the Carter family at a student lunch one spring. Vanessa was in the room. She had been invited because she knew how to attend things like that, smiling, leaning in, remembering names, making everyone feel lightly witnessed without ever saying too much. The counselor did not know better. Vanessa did. She did not correct him. That was the first theft. Not of money, of moral association. By the next year, she was posting photos from scholarship events with captions like, "Investing in futures. Some work matters more than applause. Honored to support these students." Nothing explicit enough to challenge cleanly. That was what made her dangerous. She did not lie in one blunt sentence. She built a fog and stood in the middle of it until everyone else started calling it weather. My mother helped from the side. She repeated Vanessa's heart for students at church brunches. She told women in tasteful blouses that Vanessa has poured herself into educational work. She used the scholarship as proof of my sister's character in rooms where character, once repeated enough, becomes a kind of public currency. My father did what he always did. Nothing. That was his contribution to most family harm. He never built the first layer. He just failed to stop the wall from going up. Meanwhile, the actual fund continued operating. 11 students across 3 years. 1 nursing student whose housing deposit fell through. 1 trade school student who needed a tool package. 1 freshman, whose mother lost overtime the month before move-in. 1 girl named Tessa who wrote a thank you note so careful and humble that I had to close the email and breathe before reading it again. The work was real. That is what gave the lie its power. Vanessa was not inventing a scholarship from nothing. She was standing in front of a structure I had already built and letting visibility do the rest. That is always harder to fight than a clean fabrication, because the person stealing the story can always say some version of, "I care about it too. I've been involved. I was only helping." This isn't about ownership. My family hid behind those phrases for years. Then the gala committee gave them the one thing they should never have been allowed to touch: engraved recognition. Once the donor booklet draft appeared with Vanessa profiled as the quiet force behind the scholarship, the hidden truth was no longer just private damage. It was about to become institutional record. That was what made the night unavoidable. Not that my sister was taking credit again. That she was doing it on paper, on stage, and under the seal of the foundation that held my donor file. My silence had protected the students. Then it protected the lie. The moment those two things became the same, the gala stopped being a family discomfort and became a line I could no longer cross without losing myself in it. That was what was being hidden in that room. Not merely the donor name, the fact that my family had turned my actual restraint into a ladder my sister was climbing in public. My deepest wound was not that my family overlooked me. It was that they trained me to confuse usefulness with love. That distinction shaped everything. Vanessa was what my mother liked to call a room girl. She entered spaces and somehow improved them by being visible inside them. Teachers remembered her. Neighbors remembered her. Churchwomen remembered the dress she wore 2 Easters earlier. She was warm in ways that made people feel clever for noticing her and generous for praising her. I was different. I was the daughter who noticed what was off. The bill paid twice. The date written wrong. The form missing a signature. The budget line that would break 3 months later if no one fixed it now. My mother called Vanessa radiant. She called me reliable. That sounds harmless until you grow up inside it. One child becomes admired as a presence. The other becomes valued as a function. By the time I was 12, I understood my assignment in the family without needing to be told. Vanessa sat where conversation gathered. I carried things. Vanessa got flowers after performances. I helped load costume bins into the car. Vanessa's photos stayed on the refrigerator for months. My report cards went into the kitchen drawer, under pens, batteries, rubber bands, and discount coupons. When Vanessa forgot a project, my mother drove it to school and retold the story like charming chaos was the natural tax on giftedness. When I scored highest in the district on a math exam, my father said, "Good work," and my mother asked if I could help address thank you envelopes before Sunday. This is how family erasure becomes normal. Not through one large cruelty, through 1,000 small reallocations of emotional value. My father saw more than my mother did, but not enough to save me from the structure. He used to let me sit beside him at the kitchen table while he balanced figures for his small contracting side work. He trusted me with numbers in private. He once told me, when I was 15 and furious after another dinner where Vanessa had been praised for smiling through a fundraiser while I cleaned up afterward, "You shouldn't have to be useful to be seen." That sentence stayed with me because it was the first time anyone named the wound. The problem was that he named it privately and then returned me to the same house where usefulness remained my most reliable path to being wanted. That does something to a girl. It makes her good at carrying impossible things, and terrible at insisting those things be named correctly. By the time I was grown, I had turned that childhood pattern into a whole adult personality. I was disciplined, self-supporting, financially careful, practical, and emotionally moderate in the exact ways families like mine reward when they need a daughter to absorb complexity without demanding too much ceremony in return. If my mother called only when something went wrong, I told myself it still counted as being needed. If Vanessa asked for help structuring numbers or reading legal language she did not understand, I told myself it meant she respected me in her own way. If my father left me out of the room but trusted my judgment in private, I told myself trust mattered more than praise. That last one was the most damaging, because private trust without public truth eventually becomes exploitation with soft edges. The scholarship grew directly out of that wound. Yes, I wanted to help students. Yes, I believed in the purpose of the fund. But some buried part of me also wanted to build one undeniable thing under the Carter name that could not be dismissed as just another invisible form of support. I did not want applause. I wanted my labor to exist in the world without being translated downward by my family. Instead, the scholarship recreated the exact emotional pattern I had been trying to outrun. I built the structure. Vanessa stood beside it. My mother praised the visible daughter. My father said little and benefited from the peace. That was why the gala hurt the way it did. Not because of one speech, because it was the childhood wound enlarged into a ballroom. When Vanessa called me quiet support from the stage, she did not insult me in a new language. She used the family dialect, the one where what I did always arrived smaller than what she embodied. The one where my restraint made me seem lesser rather than disciplined. The one where my value only became obvious in crisis, and even then only as long as no one had to hand me the microphone afterward. That wound also explains why I stayed silent too long. Not because I was weak. Because girls raised the way I was raised learn to believe that if they do enough meaningful work without asking to be named, someone decent will eventually notice on their own. That is a beautiful lie. And one of the most expensive a daughter can live inside. By the time the gala came, I was not merely deciding whether to challenge my sister. I was deciding whether I would keep participating in the family system that had always asked me to fund the structure while someone else inherited the light. That is the true emotional center of this story. Not donor recognition. Self-recognition. The moment a woman stops calling her own erasure generosity, that was the line the gala pushed me across. Vanessa was not dangerous because she was cruel in an obvious way. She was dangerous because she was socially elegant enough to make appropriation look like service. My mother was not dangerous because she screamed or threatened or broke things. She was dangerous because she understood how to arrange admiration before facts entered the room. Together, they formed the exact kind of antagonist structure that is hardest to fight in polite communities. Vanessa controlled atmosphere. My mother controlled framing. My father supplied silence. That was enough. Vanessa had spent her whole life learning how to stand close to goodness without ever needing to build it herself. She joined school lunches, foundation breakfasts, local reading initiatives, holiday donation drives, and scholarship ceremonies, not because she was incapable of caring, but because she understood something deep and useful very early. In most public spaces, consistent visibility becomes moral authority. If people see you beside enough worthy things, they stop asking whether you created them. She knew how to thank others just enough to sound humble. She knew how to speak in broad moral phrases that made specifics feel rude. She knew how to post photographs that looked accidental and intimate. She knew how to make a room feel warmer around her, and warm rooms rarely verify anything carefully. My mother amplified all of it. Elaine Carter never wanted to be the center of the stage herself. What she wanted was reflected prestige, the kind that comes from being seen as the mother of the right daughter. Vanessa gave her that. A visible, socially approved, photogenic daughter with a heart for students looked beautiful on a mother in county life. I did not. I was too exact, too likely to ask where the money came from, how the board approved something, who signed the paperwork, why a phrase was being used in print that could not be defended later. Women like my mother prefer daughters who make a room easier, not daughters who make the record cleaner. So she built a language around me designed to sound complimentary while keeping me peripheral. Naomi is private. She doesn't enjoy attention. She helps in her own way. She was always the practical one. None of those lines were outright lies. That was what made them so effective. The best family manipulations are sewn from true fabric. Once enough truth exists in the sentence, people stop checking what the sentence is being used to hide. Yes, I am private. Yes, I dislike shallow public attention. Yes, I am practical. My mother used those truths to justify a larger theft. If Naomi is private, if Naomi dislikes attention, Naomi cannot reasonably object to someone else receiving it. If Naomi is practical, then public credit matters less to her than to the daughter who thrives in social rooms. That was the machine. My father completed it by doing what he had always done when my mother's emotional architecture favored peace over fairness. He let it stand. Men like him often convince themselves they are neutral because they do not speak the lie first. But in family structures built on omission, passivity is active labor. He watched Vanessa drift closer and closer to the scholarship in public life. He heard people praise her for those students. He listened as my mother folded the fund into Vanessa's moral image. He never corrected the story, because correcting it would have required him to choose discomfort over convenience. He did not. That was his function in the system. Not author. Load-bearing wall. By the time the gala committee started planning donor recognition, the power structure was already complete. The school counselor had accidentally thanked the Carter family. Vanessa had accepted the social drift. My mother had repeated the right phrases in the right circles. My father had not interrupted anything. So when the foundation staff, who only knew donor identity privately, allowed public-facing language to be shaped by community context, the machine had everything it needed. Vanessa was now not just adjacent to the scholarship. She was plausible as its face. And in public life, plausibility is sometimes more powerful than proof until proof walks into the room. That was why the gala was a perfect trap. My mother arranged the seating. Vanessa approved the booklet language. The MC built a moral atmosphere around local generosity. The room filled with people already predisposed to admire the version of events my family had been feeding them for years. If I protested emotionally, I would look like a resentful daughter spoiling a good cause. If I stayed silent, the lie would become engraved memory. That is what made the antagonist structure so strong. It did not rely on one villainous act. It relied on an entire room being easier to manage than the truth. The only thing stronger than that structure was the donor file. And that was the one variable my mother could not seat, soften, or smile past once Harold Benton entered the ballroom. The award was the climax of the betrayal. But the reason it landed so hard was because it arrived after years of smaller cuts, each one deniable on its own, brutal in pattern. That is how polished families wound people. They almost never hand you one clear moment you can point to without argument. They leave you with a trail of details other people call nothing until the accumulation becomes a life. The first real wound came the year after the scholarship launched. A local newspaper printed a photo of Vanessa at a school breakfast standing beside two scholarship recipients. The caption called her a driving force behind the Carter Student Initiative. Not donor, not founder, not fund manager. Driving force. It was vague enough to survive challenge and precise enough to redirect value. When I brought it up at Sunday lunch, my mother folded the paper once, neatly, and said, that phrase stayed with me for months. Show up. As if proximity to goodness had become more socially valuable than actually financing it. At Christmas that year, my mother gave Vanessa a framed thank you note from one of the recipients. I knew immediately where it came from because the foundation had forwarded me a scanned copy for the donor archive 2 weeks earlier. Vanessa held the frame in both hands and said, "This is so touching." She did not flinch. She did not look at me. She did not say this should go to Naomi. My father smiled into his coffee cup. That was the whole family in one image. The daughter who received, the daughter who knew, the mother who curated it, the father who did nothing. Then there was the church breakfast. One of the women from the education committee introduced Vanessa to a table of school volunteers as our scholarship girl. Everyone laughed warmly. My mother touched Vanessa's shoulder. I was standing nearby holding a paper cup of coffee and a plate no one had cleared. No one corrected the woman. No one even noticed that I had gone still. Another time, a school counselor said to me, "Your sister really has a heart for these students." I said, "They matter to her." That sentence haunted me later because it was kind, and my kindness had once again left the lie enough room to survive. Then came the photo culture. Vanessa in hallways with students. Vanessa at reading nights. Vanessa at school lunch tables. Vanessa in foundation event albums. Vanessa standing close enough to scholarship recipients that anyone scrolling quickly would assume the relationship was financial rather than ceremonial. And each photograph was harmless by itself. That was the genius of it. No single image stole the fund. The pattern did. The most painful small detail came in the donor booklet itself. At every table, the gala committee placed a Navy card beside the centerpiece with scholarship impact numbers. 3 years. 11. Students. Supported. 92%. Continuation. Rate. At the bottom, in gold script, was a line that read, "Built through the vision of the Carter family and sustained through community care." That line was almost worse than naming Vanessa directly, because it dissolved my work into the family brand itself. It turned my actual labor into ambient lineage. Family structures like mine love that move. They take the daughter who did the work and spread her efforts so thin across the family myth that no one feels obligated to return it to her by name. Then there was the seating chart. I know that sounds minor. It was not. My mother had placed the commissioner, the superintendent, the foundation board chair, and the county paper at the front tables. Vanessa beside them. My father centered. My mother where photographers would naturally catch her reaction shots. I was in the back corner, placed where I could be invited, seen if necessary, and removed from visual importance. That was not logistics. That was narrative architecture. Because public life is built from more than speeches. It is built from where bodies are arranged before the speaking even begins. The final small wound before the reveal came from Vanessa herself. Just before dinner, she came to my table and said, "Please don't make tonight about old misunderstandings." Old misunderstandings. That was what she called 3 years of redirected moral credit and a printed donor profile she had no right to accept. And because families like mine rely on your fear of seeming dramatic, they always use small language to describe large thefts. Misunderstanding, confusion, tone, timing. Not the place, not the moment. Those phrases are the padding around erasure. By the time Harold Benton walked in, I was not reacting to one award anymore. I was reacting to the whole design. The caption, the framed note, the breakfast introduction, the social media drift, the donor card, the seating chart, the quiet support line. That is why when the room shifted, it did not feel like a single reveal. It felt like the first moment the pattern had become visible to people other than me. And once a pattern becomes visible, the people who built it lose one of their greatest protections. Your fear that maybe you were imagining it. I was not. And by the time the donor file reached the stage, neither was anyone else. The moment the story became unavoidable did not happen at the gala. It happened 4 days before, when an email landed in my inbox by mistake. The subject line read, "Final Gala Materials. Donor Recognition Draft. Speaker Order." It came from Dana Cho, the Foundation Grants Coordinator. She intended to send the draft packet to Harold Benton, the Executive Director, and the External Honoree Liaison. Because my donor file and Vanessa's guest profile were linked through the same scholarship event category, I received the same packet. I opened it at 8:12 a. while standing in my kitchen with toast in one hand and my work laptop booting on the counter. Page 6 stopped me cold. A full-page donor profile on Vanessa. Professional portrait. Elegant copy. Pull quote in gold italics. The text called her a quiet but powerful force behind the Carter Futures Scholarship and described her as someone whose personal commitment to student access has changed the educational path of young people across the county. I read it twice, then a third time, slower. There are moments when anger comes hot. This was not one of them. It came cold, clean. The kind of anger that arrives only after repetition has turned a wound into architecture. I forwarded the packet to my personal email, saved the attachment locally, and called the foundation. Harold Benton answered. I asked, very calmly, "Has Vanessa Carter been designated in the donor file in any capacity?" He said, "No." I asked, "Has the Carter family been identified collectively as the donor body?" "No." I asked, "Is there any version of the donor agreement under which this profile language is accurate?" A pause. Then, "No." That was the moment the emotional problem became an institutional one. Because I no longer had only my family's manipulations and my own pain. I had the foundation treasurer on the record saying the public language was false. Then he said the sentence that forced my hand. "We need to correct this before the donor recognition segment." Before the segment. That meant the gala had not just borrowed Vanessa's proximity. It had built a whole formal acknowledgement sequence around it. I asked who approved the language. He answered carefully, but carefully was enough. It appears the copy was shaped from community-facing materials and prior event references. Community-facing materials, meaning the soft fog my mother and sister had spent 3 years building, had finally drifted into institutional print. Harold then asked the question that changed everything. "Do you want the correction made publicly or quietly?" That is the real inciting incident, not the lie itself. The moment the wronged person has to decide whether to continue paying for everyone else's comfort. I told him I needed a day. He understood. Then, less than an hour later, my mother called. That timing told me the foundation had already started asking how the profile had been approved. She did not open with apology. She opened with injury. "Naomi," she said, "there seems to be unnecessary confusion over the booklet." Unnecessary confusion. That phrase did more work than almost anything else she had said to me in years. It reframed truth as inconvenience before I had spoken a word. I asked, "Did Vanessa approve the profile?" My mother avoided the question. Then she said, "This is a celebration, not a legal audit." That line settled something in me, because it showed, more clearly than any other sentence, that she understood exactly what was happening. She knew facts were involved. She had simply decided that elegance mattered more. Then she gave me the line that made the gala impossible to survive quietly. "It would be devastating if you chose this moment to make things literal." Make things literal. As if the donor agreement, the tax record, the annual transfers, and the public lie were all less important than preserving my sister's glow for one more night. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Then I called Harold back. I told him 3 things. I did not want spectacle. I would not allow false donor language to stand in print or on stage. And if donor recognition proceeded, the donor of record had to be named accurately. He said yes. I asked if he would personally attend the gala with the file. He said yes. That was the point of no return. Not because I planned to confront anyone, because I stopped lending my silence to a false record. My mother still believed she could manage the room. Vanessa still believed I would choose restraint over disruption. My father still believed family discomfort could be absorbed privately after the fact. What none of them understood was that the gala had ceased to be a family event the moment the file entered the equation. It was now a room in which printed fiction was about to collide with documented truth. And once that collision became possible, the evening no longer belonged to my family. It belonged to whichever version could survive the paperwork. The River County Civic Hall was no longer just a venue by the time dinner ended. It had become a machine. Every table, every speech, every printed line in the booklet, every camera angle, every seat assignment, every pause before applause, all of it was working toward one purpose: to turn Vanessa's proximity into proof. That is what a real pressure chamber is in a drama story. Not simply a public event, a space where the wrong narrative is given its strongest possible shape before the truth enters. And my mother had built that shape beautifully. The front tables held the people whose memory mattered most: the school superintendent, county board members, foundation trustees, a city columnist, the principal of River County High, two former scholarship recipients, and three donors whose opinions echoed through half the charitable circles in town. Vanessa was seated where the lens would find her first. My mother was angled just close enough to be seen in reaction shots. My father sat between them like a witness prepared to bless the story through silence. I was at table 14, near the service corridor, in the one area of the room where a person can be fully visible and still feel socially erased. That, too, was deliberate. My mother never liked crude cruelty. She preferred arrangements that could survive explanation. If challenged, she would have said, the front tables were for active board relationships, the corner was quieter. The service side tables had excellent sightlines. She did not think I liked being crowded. She had a defense ready for everything, because women like my mother do not rely on one lie. They rely on layers of plausible deniability. As dinner plates were cleared, the room softened into exactly the emotional condition she wanted: full enough to be generous, tired enough to be compliant, moved enough by student stories to stop checking details. That is when public theft works best. Not when people are hostile, when they are grateful. The MC returned to the stage with a warm, practiced smile and introduced the donor recognition segment as the heart of the evening. He spoke about courage, continuity, and those rare people who see the future in young lives before anyone else is willing to invest in it. That line was meant for Vanessa, not because she had earned it, because she had been prepared for it. The scholarship recipient's video had already played. The room had already watched footage of students carrying boxes into dorm halls, hugging parents in parking lots, setting textbooks on dorm desks, and smiling through the fragile relief of being allowed to continue. By then, the audience was not just listening. They were emotionally softened. That was the trap. People are least likely to challenge a false narrative when the room has already convinced them challenge would feel ugly. I knew that. So did Harold Benton. He had texted me once, 20 minutes earlier. I'm here, waiting until the recognition begins. No extra words. No drama. Just timing. I kept my phone in my lap and looked toward the stage. Vanessa rose when her name was announced and moved through the aisle like she had walked that path in her mind a dozen times already. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She did not look surprised enough to seem false or expectant enough to seem hungry. She looked exactly like what the room wanted. A woman reluctantly receiving praise for goodness she never asked to be seen for. That was what made her such an effective antagonist. Not that she was louder than everyone else. That she knew how to weaponize the audience's desire to admire someone. My mother watched her with tears already waiting in her eyes. That part mattered too. Because my mother's role in the chamber was not to speak first. It was to provide moral weather. Once the room saw a mother moved by the goodness of her daughter, correction became emotionally expensive. No one wants to interrupt a proud mother under soft lights unless the truth becomes undeniable. That was the calculation. And for a few minutes, it worked perfectly. The MC praised Vanessa. The room applauded. The foundation logo glowed behind her. The plaque waited at the podium. The donor profile sat printed on every table in heavy cream cardstock. If the lie passed through those next 5 minutes cleanly, it would be more than social drift. It would be sanctioned memory. That was when I understood something very clearly. I was not there to expose my sister. I was there to refuse the final transfer. The transfer of reality into record. That distinction mattered to me. Because I did not want revenge. I wanted the lie stopped before it hardened one step further into civic truth. And then the MC said the sentence that let me know the pressure chamber had reached full seal. Tonight, he said, looking toward Vanessa, we recognize not only generosity, but the woman whose private commitment became public transformation. Private commitment. That was my language. My actual structure. My mother had not just stolen the work. She had stolen the moral shape of how the work had been done. Vanessa put one hand over her heart. My mother lowered her head. The room held its breath in admiration. And just before the applause settled enough for Vanessa to begin, I looked toward the side doors and saw Harold Benton step into view carrying the Navy donor file. At that point, the room was complete. The lie was at maximum elegance. The paperwork had entered, and all that remained was whether the room would hear the truth before the plaque was given a name it could not legally keep. Vanessa began exactly the way I knew she would. Softly. That was her strength. She never came at a room with obvious ambition. She entered sideways, like kindness. "I never believed giving back should be about recognition," she said, and the room responded with the low, approving murmur people reserve for sentences that flatter them as much as the speaker. Because that line did not only make Vanessa look good, it let everyone in the audience feel aligned with a version of virtue that demanded nothing difficult from them. That is how elegant lies survive. They offer comfort in exchange for scrutiny. Vanessa thanked the foundation board, the school counselors, the community donors, and the students who remind us why practical help matters more than public credit. That sentence was nearly perfect in its cruelty. Practical help, public credit. She had divided the moral universe cleanly. Good people do the work, vain people ask to be named. In one sentence, she turned my silence into evidence for her superiority. The room loved it. Of course it did. My mother was already crying by then. Quietly, beautifully, the way she had cried at every event where Vanessa made her feel publicly successful. My father's expression had settled into that particular masculine satisfaction I had seen at county lunches and school ceremonies, for years the look of a man who believes history is arranging itself around his family, correctly. Then Vanessa made the move that proved she had no intention of stopping. She looked toward the back of the room toward me and said, "And to my sister Naomi, thank you for supporting this work in your own quiet way." There it was. The public reduction. Not erased. Worse. Included as a lesser function. That line would later matter more than anything else, she said. Because if she had simply ignored me, some people could have told themselves it was oversight. But by naming me in relation to the scholarship while reducing my role to supportive quietness, she revealed what the entire family system had always done: convert my labor into the emotional backdrop of someone else's identity. The room laughed softly. A few people smiled toward me. One woman near the front actually turned and nodded, as if I had just been sweetly acknowledged instead of rewritten. Then my mother stood. She took the microphone from the MC, touched Vanessa's arm lightly, and let the room settle into silence around her. My mother was at her most dangerous in moments like this. Not loud, not sharp, ceremonial. She knew how to sound like dignity while bending truth in public. "When people ask me what matters most," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. That line nearly took my breath away. Because it was my life, she was quoting back into the room under my sister's name. Then she turned toward Vanessa fully and delivered the sentence she had been saving all night. "This scholarship carries our family name, but tonight it belongs to the daughter who gave that name its heart." That was the peak. Not because the room applauded. Because the lie had now crossed from implication into sanctification. My mother had not merely praised Vanessa, she had morally crowned her. The family name, the heart, the daughter. 3 layers of theft in one sentence. The MC lifted the plaque. The photographer dropped lower for the shot. The room rose in applause. And if the night had ended there, the photo would have traveled everywhere. The paper, the foundation newsletter, the school district page, the county breakfast retelling, my mother's hallway frame. That was what made the next moment so powerful. The lie was complete, which meant there was nothing left to expose except the record itself. Harold Benton did not hurry. He walked to the front with the calm of a man who understood that speed would make the truth look emotional, and he had no intention of lending the room that excuse. He stepped just below the stage and said, with the microphone catching him cleanly, "Before this recognition is finalized, I need Naomi Carter present for donor verification." The applause broke unevenly. My mother froze with one hand still lifted toward the plaque. Vanessa did not turn right away. The MC looked toward the foundation table and found no one willing to rescue him. The room shifted from admiration into uncertainty. And uncertainty is the death of a polished lie. Because once a room feels uncertainty, people stop receiving and start watching. My mother recovered first. "This is not necessary," she said. That sentence would have worked in private. It died in public. Because Harold was already opening the file. And once a lie reaches peak confidence in front of paper, the fall is never graceful. I stood up when Harold said my name, but I did not rush. That was intentional. Not because I wanted drama. Because I knew something my family did not. Truth entering a room works best when it refuses to move like panic. Every eye followed me as I crossed from table 14 to the aisle. I could feel the social mathematics of the room changing in real time. People who had not noticed me before were now trying to remember whether they had seen me at the scholarship breakfasts. People who had assumed I was simply the quieter sister were suddenly reconsidering where the actual center of the evening had been sitting all along. My mother was calculating. Vanessa was bracing. My father, for the first time that night, looked unsure. I reached the stage. Harold Benton did not waste time on emotional framing. For the sake of the foundation record, he said, the Carter Futures Scholarship is funded under the sole donor agreement of Naomi Carter. We cannot complete this recognition accurately without correcting that publicly. That sentence changed the room. Not because it was dramatic, because it was definitive. My mother stepped forward immediately. Harold, she said, with the kind of forced warmth women use when they are trying to pull a man back into a social script he has just stepped out of. There seems to be some confusion around how the family has supported this fund. Harold did not look at her. He looked at the file. That was the exact moment my mother lost the room. She had built her power on emotional framing. He bypassed it. Vanessa then made the move I expected from her. She tried to widen the circle. Our family has always stood behind these students, she said. I think this is becoming more technical than it needs to be. More technical than it needs to be. That line would have sounded reasonable to anyone who had not seen the record. But technical truth is exactly what donor structures are built on. Who funded it? Under what agreement? With what restrictions? Under whose legal identity? There is no moral version of that once a file exists. Harold passed the first document to the foundation director, the second to the MC, and the third to the AV technician. The screen behind the stage changed. Gone was the smiling scholarship logo. In its place appeared the first page of the donor agreement. Carter Futures Scholarship, donor of record, Naomi Elise Carter. Then the signature page, mine. Then the annual transfer schedule. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. Then the board acknowledgement note confirming donor anonymity by request and internal identification for compliance only. The room went silent in the expensive way that only formal rooms can. Not shock. Recognition. A donor at the front table leaned forward and picked up the gala booklet again. A school counselor lowered her eyes to the program in her lap as if hoping the printed lie might rewrite itself if she looked hard enough. One of the scholarship recipients looked directly at Vanessa with a kind of stunned disappointment that I think hit harder than anything else in the room. Because children and young adults still expect adults to mean what they say when they put gratitude on stage. My father tried to recover through language. Naomi contributed, certainly, he said, choosing each word as if moderation could save him. But the community knows Vanessa has been the public force behind this work. Unity? Public force. That was his mistake. Because with those 3 words, he confirmed the exact structure of the theft. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I stepped to the microphone and said, "She didn't build it, she stood beside it." That line landed harder than I expected. Because it was the whole story in one sentence. Vanessa's face changed then, not into shame, not yet, but into the brittle anger of someone realizing the room now possessed an image sharper than the one she had prepared. She said, "Why didn't you correct people sooner?" That question told the room more than she understood. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "This got out of hand." Not, "I should have fixed this." Why didn't you correct people sooner? As if the burden of stopping the theft had always belonged to the person being reduced by it. I looked at her and answered with the line that broke the last sympathetic thread in the room. Because I wanted the students protected. You wanted the spotlight. No one laughed then. No one moved. No one rescued her. Harold turned one more page, and the screen showed the internal foundation note. No public donor name to be disclosed without written authorization from Naomi Carter. That document destroyed the last available defense. This had not been a family misunderstanding. Not a shared community initiative. Not a loose symbolic connection. Not support language gone too far. It had been a clear structure, privately known, publicly ignored. The truth had entered fully at that point. Not as feeling, as record. And once the room had both the paperwork and the motive, the evening no longer belonged to my mother's arrangement. It belonged to the collapse. Power reversed in 3 movements. The first was visual. The photographer, who had been crouched low to capture Vanessa receiving the plaque beneath the stage light, lowered his camera, shifted position, and angled toward me instead. That matters more than people think. In public events, the camera tells everyone where importance has moved. The second movement was institutional. The foundation director stepped to the microphone and said, clearly and formally, "For accuracy, the Carter Futures Scholarship must be publicly attributed to Naomi Carter as sole donor of record." The recognition language used tonight was not authorized by the foundation under that understanding. That sentence was devastating because it did not merely support me. It corrected the institution. My mother's expression changed from wounded control to outright fear. That was the real antagonist fracture. Not emotion. Loss of authority. She could survive looking misunderstood. She could not survive looking improper in front of trustees and county leadership. Vanessa tried one last angle. She shifted away from ownership and toward moral participation. "I care about these students," she said. "I've shown up for them." And there it was, the final refuge of people who confuse presence with authorship. No one said it did not count. But the room now understood it did not count as ownership. A scholarship recipient stood up from the middle tables, then Tessa, the nursing student whose housing deposit had been covered in year 2. She was shaking slightly, but her voice was steady when she said, "I think the person who paid for us to keep going should be the one thanked." The room turned. That was the moral reversal. Not just foundation language. Not just the donor file. A recipient saying the obvious thing adults had worked so hard to blur. The applause that followed was no longer warm or decorative. It was corrective. That is a very different sound. My father stayed seated. My mother did not. She rose halfway, then sat again as if her body could not decide whether retreat or control was still available. The MC, who had spent the evening bathing the room in polished gratitude, quietly set down the second cue card in his hand. He knew the script had died. The foundation director turned toward the podium and, without asking Vanessa for permission or even looking toward my mother, removed the plaque from where it had been positioned beside my sister. She did not hand it to me. That was the smartest thing she could have done. Because the room did not need a simple exchange of sisters. It needed a correction of center. So the plaque remained on the podium while the truth moved. I stepped forward and said the one line I had not known I would say until that exact second. I did not come here to take her place. I came here so she could no longer stand in mine. That was the payoff line. And it did what payoff lines are supposed to do. It closed the emotional argument and ended the room's search for a softer version. No one could misread that. Not family drama. Not jealousy. Not old resentment. Position. Mine. Hers. The theft was visible now. The applause that followed was longer this time, but still not celebratory in the old way. It had the sound of a room trying to repair its own complicity. My mother whispered. I turned to her and answered quietly enough that only the front rows and the microphone caught it. "No, I stopped you from finishing it." That was the moment the whole structure collapsed. Because my mother's greatest power had always been finishing the story before anyone challenged it. Now the story had been interrupted at the point of engraving. Nothing after that could restore the old version. Vanessa stepped back from the podium. My father looked smaller. My mother looked older. My sister looked, for the first time in her life, like a woman standing where charm no longer covered debt. And I stood in the center of the room without asking anyone to make me feel better about it. That was the real reversal. Not that they were humiliated, that I no longer needed them to name me correctly for the room to know where the truth lived. The aftershock began before the program officially resumed. No one rushed toward Vanessa. That detail stayed with me. Not because I wanted her isolated, but because it revealed how quickly social protection drains once admiration loses credibility. The trustees gathered around Harold Benton and the foundation director. The school counselors clustered near the recipient tables. The county columnist stopped taking soft feature notes and started writing actual quotes. 2 donors from the front looked down at the gala booklet, then folded it closed and set it aside like something contaminated. My mother still tried to salvage language. She approached the foundation director and said, "I hope this can be understood as a family misunderstanding." The director replied, "It can only be understood as a donor misidentification." That one sentence was brutal in the cleanest possible way. Because it refused the emotional category my mother depended on. Not misunderstanding. Not family complexity. Not hurt feelings. Misidentification. Institutional error. Correctable, recordable, impossible to romanticize. My father came to me next. He did not apologize. That matters. Men like him almost never move to accountability first. "This should have been handled privately," he said. I looked at him and answered. That ended the conversation. Daniel tried later, near the side corridor, where people always go when they still believe shame can be reduced by moving out of the light. He said, "I didn't know she'd let it go that far." I asked him, "How many times did you let people thank you for things you didn't build?" He did not answer. And in that silence, I finally saw him clearly, not the mastermind, not the victim, the beneficiary. Which, in some families, is worse because it feels so ordinary, no one names it soon enough. The article the next morning was not scandalous. That was a relief. The headline read, "Foundation corrects scholarship recognition after River County Gala." That wording mattered. No humiliation. No gossip. No theatrical language. Just fact. The article quoted the foundation, noted the donor file, and stated that future materials would be updated to reflect accurate attribution. By noon, the digital booklet had been replaced. By evening, the foundation website had been corrected. By the next week, the gala photo of Vanessa with the plaque had disappeared from every official page tied to the event. That is another kind of aftershock people rarely talk about. Digital erasure of the lie, once the record becomes expensive to defend. My mother called 6 times over the next 2 days. The first voicemail opened with tears. The second with anger. The third with the sentence I had expected all along. "You could have come to us first." That line used to work on me. Not anymore. Because she had built an entire room where coming to us first had never been an option. Once the profile printed, once the plaque went on stage, once the donor segment was planned around my sister's face, the question was not whether I should have come to them first. It was whether I would continue honoring a structure designed to erase me politely. I did not call back. My father texted, "Your mother is devastated." There it was. The old recentering move. The pain of the exposed person is always treated as more urgent than the pain of the person erased. I did not answer that either. Instead, I opened my archive of scholarship records and organized every document into one clean file. Donor agreement, transfer confirmations, board notes, recipient category summaries, correspondence approvals, the mistaken gala profile, the revised post-gala correction. Not because I wanted a case. Because I wanted my own history in my own hands. That mattered more than I can explain. For years, my life had existed partly in my family's language. The file ended that. 2 scholarship recipients wrote to the foundation, asking if they could send thank you notes directly to me in the future. One trustee asked if I would consider sitting on the Scholarship Review Advisory Panel. The county superintendent sent a formal message expressing regret for the confusion and appreciation for the integrity of your long-term commitment. Integrity. That word landed differently than all the soft family words that had come before it. Because it named not just the gift but the discipline behind it. Vanessa called on the 3rd night. I answered. She did not start with apology. She started with injury. "You let me walk into that room," she said. And in that sentence, I finally understood the full shape of her selfishness. She was not most disturbed by the fact that she had taken my place. She was disturbed that the stage gave way under her before she had chosen to step off it. I said, "You stood there willingly." Silence. Then she cried. Quietly. Honestly. I think. But too late. She told me she never thought of it as stealing because everyone already connected me to the scholarship. That line mattered because it revealed the actual disease beneath so much family theft. If enough people say your name near something good, you begin to believe your closeness has become ownership. I told her, "People assuming does not make it yours." You knew that. She did not argue. That was the first real crack in her. Not the public one. The private one. And while it did not heal anything, it gave me one thing I had not had before. Proof that she understood the difference and crossed it anyway. That made the ending possible. Because once the lie has no moral cover left, all that remains is what you decide to do with your own life after it. 2 months after the gala, I met with the River County Education Foundation in a small conference room with bad coffee, legal pads, and no room for performance. That was exactly what I wanted. No chandeliers. No speeches. No applause. No family. Just the record. Harold Benton was there. So was the executive director, 2 trustees, and compliance counsel on video. They offered to rename the scholarship if I wanted distance from the Carter name. I considered it. For a full minute, I considered it. Because there is a particular temptation after betrayal to start over. Clean, new name, new structure, no contamination, no family residue. But then I thought about what women like me are so often asked to do after other people misuse what we built. Leave it. Relinquish it. Begin again somewhere else. Surrender the original to keep the peace. I was finished doing that. So I said, no, keep the scholarship, keep the name, correct the record. That was the expensive choice. Not dramatic. Expensive. Because it meant I was no longer walking away from what I built simply because someone else stood in front of it too long. The foundation revised all public documents. The donor language was permanently locked to my authorization. The scholarship page was updated. The board adopted a donor attribution rule requiring direct file verification before any recognition copy could be approved. That was justice in the form I trust most. Structural. My mother never gave me the apology I deserved. That also matters. Because expensive endings are not built from fantasy. They are built from clarity. She sent messages. She cried. She used words like confusion, hurt, family dignity, bad timing, and pain. What she never used, not once, was the clean word. Wrong. My father came closer. He called one Sunday evening and said, I should have said your name years ago. That was all. No speech. No defense. No attempt to soften the old pattern. And because it was simple, I believed it. I did not thank him for saying it. I did not absolve him. I just let the sentence stand where it should have stood long ago. Vanessa came to see me 3 months later. Not at home. At my office. That detail mattered. She had to come into a room that belonged to me. She sat in the chair across from my desk, looked around at the stacked files, the framed certifications, the workboards, the order of a life built without family applause, and said, very quietly, I think I liked being seen for goodness more than I cared where the goodness came from. That was the first fully honest sentence she had ever said to me. And because it was fully honest, I gave her one in return. I'm not angry that you wanted to be admired, I said. I'm angry that you needed my silence to do it. That was the line she could not answer. Because it was the whole truth. In the end, the most important thing that happened after the gala was not the corrected article, not the trustees, not the donor file, not even the conversations. It was what changed in me. I stopped speaking about the scholarship as something I had helped with. I stopped using the language my family had trained me to use. I stopped translating my own labor downward for the comfort of the room. And then, 6 months later, when the foundation asked whether I wanted to attend the student continuation dinner as donor of record, I said yes. That was the expensive ending. Not because I wanted the spotlight, because for the first time, I understood that standing beside my own work was not vanity, it was alignment. At that dinner, there was no grand stage. Just students, faculty, trustees, and a long rectangular table set with water glasses and folded napkins. One of the scholarship recipients, a first-generation nursing student named Elena, looked at me and said, smiling, I thought the donor would be older. I asked, how much older? She laughed and said, old enough to make speeches. I laughed too. Then I said, no speeches, just paperwork and timing. The whole table laughed. And in that moment, I felt something settle inside me that the gala itself had not given me. Not vindication. Not triumph. Not revenge. Ownership. Not of the fund. Of my own position in the world. I was no longer the quiet sister in the back of the room. No longer the useful daughter whose restraint could be borrowed by other people. No longer the woman seated near the catering station while someone else accepted the polished version of her labor. I was the record. That is the expensive ending. Not that the liar loses the room. That the truth no longer needs the liar's permission to exist. If there is a final lesson here, it is not that exposure heals everything. It does not. Some wounds remain expensive. The lesson is simpler and harder. You do not owe your silence to people who build identity from your restraint, and if you have spent years confusing humility with disappearance, one day you may have to step into the light not because you suddenly want applause, but because leaving your work unnamed has become another form of betrayal. That night, my sister lost a plaque. My mother lost a narrative. My father lost the shelter of omission. But what I lost was the most valuable thing to lose. The old belief that if I kept doing enough, someone else would eventually name me correctly. They didn't, so I did. And from that point on, the room changed. For good.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real person or even is coincidental. This visual is not new, not a documentary. It is reason for creative story retelling purpose only AI assistant production.